You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NATSO. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters, everybody. My name is John Eichberger with the Fuels Institute and NATSO. I'm going to be your host today, and I'm excited about today. We're going to have a conversation about something that we may not all be very familiar with. There is a trend going on to put pressure on organizations and companies to demonstrate their performance on environment, social, and governance issues. And that's something that we need to be paying attention to. So we're going to be joined by Jeff Hove, who is the Vice President of the Fuels Institute. And we're going to talk about what this might mean for the convenience fuel retailing industry and the economy at large. Jeff, welcome to Convenience Matters. How you doing?
Pretty good, John. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. As you know, we're entering 21 here, and a new administration taking over in Washington, a new Congress, and we know that there's going to be a very different focus on environmental issues than we've seen the last 4 years. The president has already indicated that he's rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. I've seen reports that they're going to revisit the fuel economy standards. We've heard about electrification strategies, carbon mitigation strategies, a whole bunch of stuff happening on the federal level. But I think the thing that a lot of people haven't paid attention to is this push from not the government yet, but from the financial sector to ensure that companies are taking their responsibilities on environment, social, and governance issues very seriously. And you've done quite a bit of work on the environmental side. Can you kind of talk to us? What is this thing about ESG, and what does it really mean?
Yeah, I mean, ESG has got a number of layers to it. It is a voluntary program, and as you said, it's really being directed by the financial institutions. So it is a methodology. A lot of companies out there have got a sustainability program. And of course, industries have been accused of greenwashing those programs. And what ESG is really doing is it's demanding the tracking of certain metrics that are material to like greenhouse gas emissions. So for our industry, we're really looking at CO2 emissions. And it is a voluntary program today, which is very interesting in the sense that we're seeing a huge number of companies looking into this and preparing for ESG planning. And so with this new administration, it's going to be interesting to see at what point does it become regulated, and how do we keep our place at the table during those discussions.
So who's kind of driving this? I mean, you say it's voluntary, but are companies stepping up and saying, hey, look at me, look at my program? Or are they being compelled to do that by some third party?
A lot of it is being pushed by investors. BlackRock, for example, came out in January and said that if you want to be in their portfolio, which is global multi-billion-dollar portfolios, you have to have an ESG plan in place. And there are groups that are going to be analyzing and scoring your ESG plan as a company. And it's going to become a bit of a rating tool. And it's going to direct investors that want to be more green conscious in where they invest their dollars. And that's been the big push right now. And then indirectly, our folks are going to be doing business with other folks, and those other groups are going to be demanding that or requiring that you have an ESG plan in place in order to do business with them. So it's a bit of a domino effect.
Now, when you think about ESG, I mean, obviously social metrics are very easy to identify, especially when you think about the last 12, 24 months of some social unrest and social justice issues. Those type of policies are easy to measure. I think governance is probably pretty easy to measure. What is your governance structure? What are your policies? What are your controls? Those are things that you can demonstrate pretty easily. On the environmental side, I think it's got to be a little more challenging. I mean, what are the primary focuses that the transportation sector, in particular, and convenience retailers specifically, I mean, what types of things can they do or demonstrate to kind of satisfy this pressure to have some sort of environmental policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. The transportation fuels industry is carbon intense. I mean, most people realize that transportation right now leads the way for greenhouse gas emissions. I will footnote here that an ESG does not have a threshold, a goal, or they're not demanding a zero emissions economy. What they're asking for is for industry to take a look at where emissions are coming from under the environment, under the E aspect of ESG. And that can be anything from your kilowatt hours consumed for the different locations of doing business. What's the carbon intensity of that electricity? But for the most part, we're really looking at what's the carbon intensity of the gasoline and diesel, the ethanol, the biodiesel, anything that's in your fuel mix. So what was the carbon intensity from producing those fuels, to consuming those fuels? And then in some cases, we've got scope 3 emissions on, or indirect emissions on the fuels that are being sold to the consumer. So really 3 different emission sets under the greenhouse gas protocols. And you have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 are emissions that you directly create. So if you've got a fleet of transports and you're burning diesel, what are your CO2 emissions from that practice? Scope 2 is mostly evolved around your kilowatt hour consumption. And then scope 3 are more indirect emissions, such as the products being sold to end users.
So, I mean, I understand when we think about the investing houses, you mentioned BlackRock and a few others, and a lot of the European banks have done the same thing over in Europe, putting pressure on publicly traded companies. The vast majority of the convenience industry is privately held. If I'm sitting there, I'm a privately held company, so I got 50 stores, and this doesn't matter to me. I don't have to pay attention to this. I'm not a publicly traded company. Why would I be wrong in thinking that way?
That's another really good question. I think a couple ways of approaching ESG. One is how do we tell our story, right? How does a privately held company, again, this is a voluntary program today, but it's an opportunity for even a privately held company to begin jumping into this program while it's voluntary and really taking a look at your emissions profiles, because a lot of this industry has a positive message, right? We're incorporating biofuels. We are offering, we might be offering electric vehicle charging, supply. And so there's a lot of good messages in there that we can start to tell the public through ESG and start setting those goals and let people know where we're going with our fuels profile. The other aspect is why a privately held company may want to be getting involved now is that it's pretty understood that although this is voluntary today, it's very likely that this is going to become a regulated item. And of course, I think most of the listeners understand what that entails and what that's going to mean. So I think it's important for folks to get involved today and maintain our seat at a table during those discussions, while this is being developed, through legislation and rulemaking and all the above. I mean, we need to, if we're not at the table, well, we know what happens then.
Yeah, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Exactly.
And that's something that this industry has been aware of for decades. And I think, you and I have talked about what the prospect is for possibly having a regulatory regime. And I think there's a lack of familiarity within the regulatory bodies and even the standard setting bodies regarding what the operation components of the fuel retailing and fuels industry really is and what the opportunities might be to improve the environmental position. So as they start developing these standards or these regulations, it's really important that the stakeholders are going to be affected by them get in there and share, hey, these are the things we can do. These are the things that are kind of outside of our ability. So making sure that companies aren't held accountable for things beyond their ability to influence. I mean, you take a look at some examples, like some of the major global corporations have started making announcements, hey, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. And they've looked at their own operations, but then they look at their suppliers and they're starting to push requirements upstream. Say we're going to require our distributors to do X, Y, and Z, and then we're going to take credit for that because we have the bully pulpit and we can make that happen. If you're a fuel retailer and you're a smaller company, you don't have that kind of leverage to force third parties to adhere to your policies. So making sure that these standards are set in a way that is equitable to the ability of an entity to independently control their environmental performance is going to be absolutely essential.
I from what I'm reading and what I'm seeing, as far as the folks that are trying to set the standards on ESG, whether that's emissions modeling or how, what metrics we should be tracking, it's pretty clear that the fuel retail industry has not been at the table. And I think your point is very well made that, we need to get involved here, and help them understand, to your point, what goes into the whole fuel chain and where, otherwise we're going to have some seriously onerous rules, and the smaller organizations are going to have a very difficult time.
Now, when we talk about ESG and we start talking about the standards or the expectations of those pushing and supporting the development of these, is it exclusively on greenhouse gas emissions, or is it more of a comprehensive environmental plan? Because in the fuels industry, you've got spill control and containment. You've got hazardous materials sitting in underground storage tanks that you have to maintain and take care of. You've got a lot of things you can do to reduce your environmental footprint that may not be related to greenhouse gas emissions. Is there room within the ESG world to get credit and recognition for the things we're doing that may not be directly related to GHG emissions?
Absolutely. Again, it's an opportunity. Folks are doing a lot of things today that they're just not they're not being recognized for, and in all of those things, whether it's practices on offering less plastics or a recycling program, if an organization is adopting solar, I think it's important that wherever there's an environmental metric to be measured, that we get we take that opportunity and look at it right down to, our SPCC rules on spill prevention, or are the steps that we take to prevent releases into the environment from our underground storage tanks. And every organization seems to have some other environmental aspects that they're really trying to attack. And this is just a good opportunity to share that message and set goals for improvement. Right. A major part of the ESG program is, we're going to be setting baselines here. What are we doing today? But what the investors want to know and what other groups want to know is, what are we doing to improve on those, and so we want to set goals and share those goals, with the investors and with the consumers, and it's a good message.
Yeah, so if I'm listening to this podcast thinking, well, man, I need to probably get on this, where do I start? What are the initial steps to position myself and my company to begin developing an ESG program and establishing records and metrics that can demonstrate our performance and improvement over time?
So what the Fuels Institute did, we convened a large group of folks that are in the fuels industry, so from refiner to retailer, and we asked that same question. What is missing out there? This is, like I said earlier, it's got a lot of layers to it. It's a voluntary program. Nothing is really black and white, but things are progressing quickly. So what the group asked was the creation of a toolbox, if you will, or an application where we can start inputting metrics. We can say how many gallons of fuel or how many kilowatt hours, or what were some of these other environmental practices that have been incorporated into a company, and start tracking those numbers. So the Fuels Institute is in the process of building this application that's going to allow the user to have these inputs into their ESG, and help determine what those impacts are.
And I think, obviously I'm aware of that since we're both in the Fuels Institute. I think the other benefit of that is, one, you get the companies being able to track their own progress. But through a record-keeping system like that, if we get a critical mass of participating organizations, we can start creating a benchmark for the industry. And that can allow individual companies to compare their performance, not only against themselves, but against others, identify opportunities, and see what the path forward might be. It'll also give us an opportunity, if this becomes a regulated entity and a regulated program, to deliver that knowledge to the regulators so that they can start building programs and requirements that make sense, that are well thought out, that are rooted in experience, rooted in market facts, rather than aspirational objectives that may not be feasible. So I think I'm excited about this program that you personally, for the Fuels Institute, have been building, because I think there's a need out there for us to help industry, whether it be the fuel retailing industry or even further upstream and other areas of the transportation market, to track what they're doing and to demonstrate the breadth of what they're doing. I get so concerned that so often when we talk about the environment, we get myopically focused on one topic: carbon, greenhouse gas, climate change. It's an important issue, absolutely. But there are so many other things that affect the environment in which we live that organizations are doing good stuff to protect it. But because it doesn't fall within that category of carbon mitigation, climate change mitigation, it's not getting any attention. I think that's a failure, because we can't get so focused on one issue that all the other issues become trivial, because that's completely, I think it's abdicating a responsibility as stewards of the environment.
I agree, and we really seem to be at that phase where we're hearing a lot of grandiose political rhetoric that has this big end game. This is where we're going to be, and this complete failure of looking at that step process. Right, we're not just going to get there overnight. There has to be a plan. There has to be a system. And it's going to be, honestly, it's going to be baby steps. It is a very important issue. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think we're helping industry by just simply putting out, some I'll call it unachievable goal as it's written today, and not try to explain, how we can incrementally improve. And that's what I see ESG doing is, setting our baseline. What are those incremental improvements? Yes, we see the end game, but, we need those tools to get there.
Yeah. So, Jeff, thanks for joining Convenience Matters today. And for those of you listening, pay attention to fuelsinstitute.org. The organization is doing quite a bit, and we'll be issuing some papers discussing the ESG movement and programs and elements. As Jeff mentioned, trying to develop a tracking application to help organizations monitor their behavior, track it, and develop a reporting mechanism that fits their needs and encompasses all the elements of their environmental programs that they're implementing. So pay attention to fuelsinstitute.org. Again, Jeff, thanks for joining us on Convenience Matters. And everybody out there, thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on the next episode of Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NATSO and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.